Good morning, everyone. We'll just have 1 minute to let everyone enter and then we'll start. Okay, good morning and welcome to this mnemonic webinar about enterprise security architecture. As you might know, this is a part of our webinar series, our 6-part webinar series, where we present some of the articles from our recently launched security report. In this year's report, you can read about our predictions for 2021 and some of our observations from our 24/7 Security Operations Center. The report includes articles written by our team of security experts about a broad set of current security challenges and topics like. And previously, we had webinars on Security Predictions 2021, Lessons Learned from COVID-19, and Reducing the Risk of Insider Threats. Today, we will dive more into how to build an enterprise security architecture. In the upcoming months, we're having webinars about third-party dependencies in development, unsanctioned remote and third-party access practices, and new paradigms for security threats in modern cloud applications. And next up out of these is the Securing Third-Party Dependencies in Development that will be on April 8th. And you can find more information about this webinar and the 2 other upcoming webinars at mnemonic.no/webinars. And now over to the presenters of today. They have both contributed in the Enterprise Security Architecture article in this year's report. They both work in our Governance, Risk and Compliance department, where Mark Totten works as a Principal Management Consultant and Angel Alonso as a team leader. And you can get to learn more about their background and experience with this topic in their presentation. But before I give the word to Mark and Alonso, I just have one practical thing. You can submit questions throughout the presentation. And if you're in a browser, you can select the Q&A icon from the bottom menu. If you are in the WebEx application, you will have a Q&A panel that will appear on your right side. And you can enter your questions to all panelists. And if you have a specific questions to either Mark or Alonso, please specify that, and they will answer all questions at the very end of the presentation. Okay, so that's it from me, and let's start. And I will now hand over the presentation to Mark.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to walk you through a bit of the background as to how and why we started developing this approach to enterprise security architecture. And after that, I'll hand over to Alonso, who'll walk us through the actual framework. For about 18 months, I led a team of information security experts implementing an information security management system for an enterprise in the car retail industry. Introducing an ISMS, as we call it, requires identifying the necessary levels of security for the enterprise and implementing appropriate controls to ensure that these are achieved. But we wanted to find a better way to match security to the needs of the enterprise. The IT department was full of clever people who'd implemented a lot of security controls on a common sense and experience basis, but it was plain they didn't have a clear understanding of the business needs for security. The security initiatives weren't linked to the business risks and weren't reported in a way that gave value to the business. One question that often arises is, does the enterprise need to understand security? My answer is no, that's not its role. But it does need to understand the value of the information assets it has and the potential impact of a compromise to confidentiality, integrity, or availability. The corollary to that question is, does security and IT need to understand the enterprise? And my answer to that is yes, they do. At least they need to understand the criticality of the enterprise information that's being processed and the level of security that's required. If we could achieve these two requirements, we could ensure that the security we implement is only what the enterprise needs, but is all the security the business needs. So how are we going to achieve this? We needed a role that could link business needs to security solutions. This is what we call an enterprise security architect. Now, luckily, I'd been on a course to learn about a framework for defining information security architecture based on business needs. It's called SABSA. That stands for the Sherwood Applied Business Security Architecture. It's a framework that was designed for security, but is so generic that it can be applied to almost any question, from where to go on holiday to which car to buy. And this is the framework. I'm not going to go into lots of detail on this, but I'd like to give you the rough outline of how it works. As you can see, there are 6 verticals represented by various questions: what, why, how, who, where, and when. And there are 6 horizontals, which take us through the levels of detail from the contextual picture of the enterprise all the way down to component architecture. So what we need to do in this contextual area, which is talking to the business, we need to understand what the goals and objectives of the business are and which business assets are being used to achieve these goals. That's the what of it. The why is, why do we need to protect these assets? What are the opportunities and threats that face the business? What are the business risks that we need to take care of? The how is the business processes. Where is the information used? How is it used? What goes in and what comes out, and where does it go to? We need to understand the organization, and we need an organization that can actually follow the security needs of the enterprise. Where is the business geography? Do we have particular buildings that we need to secure? Do we have places where special processes are carried out that we need to take special care of? And the when is time dependencies. Are there certain reports we have to produce? If the systems go down, how soon do they have to be back up in order for us to keep processing? The contextual layer is talking to the business in business terms. And from it, the enterprise security architect, which I shall come back to in a second, needs to provide a concept for how to achieve the security architecture that's needed. Now, we are often asked for a security architect, but what that means to different companies varies enormously. Some see them as a strategic role, some see them as extremely technical, and any combination of the two at all different layers of complexity, which makes it very difficult for us to provide one person who can achieve all the needs of a company. But back to SABSA. The security architect, the enterprise security architecture, provides the big picture, how information security is going to be structured throughout the enterprise. From the context, they identify the business drivers for security, what makes security necessary. They identify the elements, attributes of information security that are needed. They identify the company's risk appetite. They design how security becomes part of the business processes while causing a minimum of disruption. You need to meld the security responsibilities into the organization, provide new roles if necessary, and allocate responsibilities as needed. The need for control about locations. For example, if everyone's role is defined in one place, Active Directory, can we use that to then give people physical access to the locations that they need to have to simplify the security? And we also need to look at things like the need for extra capacity at certain times, e.g., the launch of a new car model, and that's broken several companies' web pages. How quickly do the systems need to be restored after an incident? This means what kind of backups do we need? Do we need to have a failover system? Do we need to have mirroring? And so forth. After this, we look at the logical requirements. What are the functions that we need to satisfy the architecture? Do we need identity management, anti-malware, and so on? Then we go down to the physical layer. How do we physically link all this together? How do we construct our network? And finally, the component level. What are the actual models of firewall we need to implement, logging solutions, and so on, that meet the needs of the architecture? Now, obviously, the physical and component layers have less relevance as organizations move into the cloud, but they're still very relevant for physical security. And the final layer, service management, really goes across all the other layers and ensures that each layer delivers in accordance with the business drivers. It ensures operational risk assessments are carried out and followed up. It follows up compliance requirements such as GDPR and SLAs, and it reports to the business on how we are dealing with security. How did we use it? Well, we used questionnaires and interviews to gather information. We analyzed it to identify the attributes we needed. This gave us a way to link security together. Unfortunately, the only tool we had was an Excel spreadsheet, which is hardly optimal. But we developed a coding for each layer so that we could link all the layers together. I started thinking about using a database and started brushing up my knowledge of Microsoft Access, which is a very basic database tool that I'm not very good at. I had several false starts and I was starting to feel a little bit depressed about it. But luckily, Alonso had been thinking along the same lines, but from a different angle. He wanted to link together all the domains of expertise in mnemonic to respond to customer requests for security architectures, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a broad and vague term. Fortunately, mnemonic is organized very much in harmony with the SAPSA framework. So by developing a way to link our risk and security expertise across all the domains in mnemonic and to document our client security needs from business risk down to individual components, we believe we can finally deliver that most elusive of security prizes, which is return on security investment. Alonso had already started designing a database and Access himself, was far more skilled at it than I, thankfully. We started working together, refining our ideas and involving people across mnemonic. Our management team recognized the potential in this concept, and we formed an enterprise security architecture group with representatives from every team in mnemonic. We quickly realized we couldn't keep using Access, as it has problems scaling to the levels we needed. So we did some research into architecture tools that could help us, and finally chose BizDesign Enterprise Studio. Our framework gives us the tools we need to communicate with business stakeholders about the business risks they face. It allows us to evaluate the potential impact of these risks and to decide on the required level of information security to address them. It also allows us to align the security architecture and the individual components to achieve the appropriate level of security. It makes it easier and more effective to reuse experience across mnemonic departments and to leverage the breadth and depth of our security expertise. And above all, it allows us to report on security in business terms that demonstrate value to the enterprise. This is a very rough view of our framework that Alonso will go in much more detail on. It's business-oriented. It identifies business drivers for security. It's risk-based. It looks at threat events and control objectives. It ensures an appropriate level of security by identifying the correct control measures. And it can be traced from the top down for completeness to demonstrate to the business we are addressing all their security concerns, and from the bottom up to justify the business investments in security. So now I'll hand you over to Alonso, who will walk you through the security framework.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark, and everyone. Thanks to everyone for being in the webinar today. How we actually implemented our framework, or how looks our framework. So it's not an easy answer to explain in 15 minutes, but to make it easier for you, first I will show you the actual meta model of the framework to give you the high-level layers that we're using. Afterwards, I will show you how looks the actual implementation that we have created. And at the end, I will give you an example of how we use it. So we'll go we will navigate the framework together, okay? So let me start showing you how looks the actual meta model. As mentioned by Mark before, one of the main goals is to link everything together, to have this traceability that we can go from top to down. So of course, as a business-oriented framework, we will start in the business objectives. So the first step is that you need to understand what actually your business wants to achieve. So you need to understand what they are the goals, what they are their objectives. Once identified those, you could take those business objectives and go to the next level, to the business driver for security, that it will be the abstraction of those business objectives in something that is relevant for security. You could see this, for example, as the security requirements or the business requirements that security has to comply with to actually support the business, to actually be an enabler for the business. That will be the business driver for security layer. And that's the one give us the first connection or the first possibility to actually talk business. So we are still in this level talking business language. When you have defined your business drivers, the way that you enable the business, to continue this traceability, to continue this abstraction to the next level, to connect business to security, we define attributes. The attributes concept is a way to actually explain what a business driver for security means in our context. The typical attributes that everyone in this room is known with is the CIA triad, confidentiality and reliability, those examples of attributes. But what means that in my context? So let's define that one in a way that any business, any stakeholders actually could understand what it means for our business. So with these three first layers, we have covered this missing link between business and security. Those attributes can be affected by threat events. They can be negatively affected by some threat events, meaning that actually they can stop us to support the business and eventually stop us to achieve our business objectives. That's why those threat events, in addition to be connected to attributes, we have connected, of course, to the threat actors that could be relevant to cause those threat events, and also to techniques used by those threat actors. Next level in the model, you will see after threat events, we go to control objectives. Which control objectives can help us to minimize the probability of those threat events? Which control objectives can help us to minimize eventually the risk to the business? Doing this is where we can defend actually that we are making a risk-based approach, that we're making risk-based decisions. We are not going to take all the control objectives that I could take in all the standards. We will just focus on those ones that they actually affect to the threat events that they are more interested, or that we are more interested in. Next level in this traceability framework is that we go from the control objectives to actually control measures, actual implementation controls, which controls are going to put in place to actually support or achieve those control objectives. Further down the stack, of course, control measures could be mapped to more specific technological stack in your business context. As an example, in mnemonic, as our internal framework, we have mapped it to services, to our mnemonic services. In this way, mapping to mnemonic services, we have a full service catalog, and we ensure we can help focus our services, which services we can provide to actually track back to the threat events that we are more interested in. We also, in addition to map to our services, we actually have mapped all the technologies that support those services. So we have a consistent technology portfolio that actually give us the possibility to identify if there is some threat events that we are not well covered. We don't have the right technologies that we can find these new technologies. As the last level, you can see there in our specific mnemonic implementation to the right, we also have mapped it to vendors to have also a consistent portfolio of vendors that we have today, and eventually find gaps and potential new partnerships. So this is the meta model. This is the idea behind the model. How this actually looks in practice is a little bit more complicated, and is how you see in the next slide. This is how looks our framework today. It's a lot of information there, a lot of relationships, a lot of traceability. Of course, you can, as mentioned by Mark before, it's difficult to do this in Excel, so that we need to find a better tool. And also one big part of our project actually was to find a good tool to this, and there is a full enterprise architecture software solutions that are out, and we built this one in this design. Actually, that's the name of the internal tool that we use. As you can see here, the three first layers are as explained before. When we go down in the model, in the actual framework, I will start to explain you how we actually define the different components there, because business objectives, business drivers, and attributes, that would be the same. It's our own definitions of those ones, the same that we mentioned before. But threat events, we have defined, we have a full team working in TAI, threat intelligence. So they have their own taxonomy to define threat events. So what we have done is those threat events that they have associated threat actors are mapped to different MITRA techniques. So we use MITRA, the Mitra-Rammeberg framework, to actually say, okay, this threat event here could use the threat actors use different techniques there. That gives us a very good mapping of actual technical attack vectors that we can relate it to those threat events, and eventually back down we can map to control objectives. You see here is extra mappings, because we have found also interesting for us in our use case to map extra connections, extra paths. For example, as you see, data sources mitigation into the right, that was not in the meta model, but that's something that Mitra also gives you. The Mitra framework, you have data sources and mitigation related to the technique, so we implemented in our framework also and connected directly to the services. This one we use it, for example, to see the coverage of our detection services. But coming back to the main framework, as you see, the threat events. If you remember the meta model, we connected. If you remember the meta model, we connected to control objectives. There was a lot of things to choose from. You could define your own. You could go for some known standard outside. We choose NIST cybersecurity framework. We felt that there was, after a little bit sharing the experience from different departments, I think there was a good balance of high-level objectives that cover most of the things that we face today. So we connect to NIST cybersecurity subcategory. So that's the lowest level in the cybersecurity framework. Of course, cybersecurity framework, you are probably very known with it. They have mapped to categories. They also categories are grouped further in the functions that we are used to hear all the time: identify, protect, detect, response, and recover. So after define the control objectives using the NIST cybersecurity framework subcategories, we connect, or we map also trace to different frameworks, to different control frameworks. If you remember the meta model, it was control objectives, control measures. So those control measures, since we want to speak as many languages as possible, so we decide to map to as many control standards as we see relevant at least to our customers. So we have mapped to CIS cybersecurity controls, the top 20. We have mapped to Cloud Security Alliance control map trees. We have mapped to ISO 27001. Also, 27001, there is mapped to NSM Grundprinzipien, and also we have mapped to the SMMC framework and to the NIST 853. So this gives us the possibility to actually choose. First, there is a possibility to have the overview of how these control objectives can fill in the different standards, give a lot of input there, and also give us the possibility to choose one of those ones and speak the specific language that that content requires. And as mentioned before, the last step is that we connect from control objectives to our services, technologies, and vendors. In this case, we use 853 to connect to our services, as we see one of the most detailed and with full coverage of the frameworks there out. I know it's quite a lot of content here, but just imagine this one, how it looks like. It's like inside of the model in our implementation, we have a lot of artifacts, a lot of relationships. So it has been a very interesting project to work with in the last month. To make easier for you to understand what actually means, let me guide you through an example, okay? Now we go to an example. Let's start in the middle of the model. Let's choose one threat event. Threat event that everyone is talking all the time and everyone is worried. Ransomware. That's it? Okay, let's talk about the threat event ransomware. So we have a ransomware infection that could lead to unavailable systems and potential information leakage. Many of the ransomware, we know that they actually try to leak information in between all the chaos that they create by encrypting data. So how we navigate the model? So that's one of the beauties of the model. We can go up, we can go down, we can go left. In this case, let me guide you first to up. Let's go to the business side. How we connect this ransomware event to the business side. So if you see, we have defined several attributes. Not only the typical available confidentiality and integrity, we have defined several more attributes that they are relevant in today's security. In this case, in our model, ransomware connects specifically to safe and to recoverable also. But remember, here is very important to remember that the attributes as part of this framework has to be defined. What means available for me? It means my fabric is up and running, or it means my bank transactions are running. So we need to have very clear what means those for me, for my company, because that's the link that we normally are missing. And that definition is the one that gives us the possibility to talk to all the stakeholders. When we go one level up, we actually start to talk business there. How my security initiatives help the business? How, by protecting against ransomware, I'm helping my company to build appropriate technical organizational measures to ensure resilience. I enable my company to demonstrate compliance with legal regulations and customer agreements and build trust in our business. So you see there is a lot of relationships up. And for example, one of these ones is connected up down in the stack to this business driver for security. We have created in our framework, we have created a set of standard business drivers that we believe that will resonate with most of the people. So somehow you could just say, okay, for this scenario here, for this organization, these are the business drivers that are more relevant for them. So we have a lot of content in this layer that we could somehow adapt and choose from. The same way here, we have defined two business objectives, very generical, to resonate with most of the companies. I want to be the preferred company. I want the customer to use me, or I want to deliver shareholder value. So you see, by doing these three steps, actually by the business driver for security, that's where we can connect to the business. We can start to talk business and nevertheless show how we support, how we enable the business. If we come back to the middle of the model, we come back again to the threat events, and now we go to the left. Ransomware, in our taxonomy, they are connected to crime syndicates and nation states, and also they are connected to several MITRA techniques. In this example here in the picture, I only choose the three first phases. Okay, the three first phases of an attack, but just to give you an example how we have mapped it. To deep down a little bit more in that example, if you choose one or two of the techniques, let's say spear phishing. Spear phishing is also in the framework. Remember, traceability, we connect it to recommendations in Mitra. That's the recommendations: use training, restricted web content access, antivirus, and to data sources, email gateway, DNS records. Those are the connections that the Mitra framework provides us. But based on those ones, and that's one, let's say, is one path of our framework, we focus more on connecting back to this threat event to actually down to, okay, how can I support ransomware? How can I minimize the risk of ransomware? What I'm going to focus myself to take a risk-based approach. Which are the control objectives that are more relevant for me? So this is just a subset of the control objectives that we have connected to one framework to show you in this example. We define it like that. If we take one example of those ones, for example, we know that one of the control objectives in cybersecurity framework says malicious code is detected. That's a very general, doesn't it? How we can do it? We can do it in different controls. For example, if you look into ISO, that will be mapped to I need to have control against malware. If you look into NIST 153, that is mapped to malicious code protection and spam protection with different implementation guidelines that you will have there. These cybersecurity controls, the 3, the 7, and the 8, or cloud control matrix, also you have different mappings there. So we have mapped all these things together to have possibility, okay, how I implement this malicious code is detected in my organization, which controls I'm going to use to actually track this and focus on those controls that they are relevant for this scenario, for this threat. Therefore, risks. I can justify that this is a risk-based approach and they're appropriate for my risk because this is what I find appropriate. This is how I'm going to defend, that I do the right things to actually defend against that one. And again, as mentioned before, you could continue, you could use the same logic and go down in the framework and connect to your technological stack. You can go to components, you go to physical, that you can do it in many different ways. As we explained before, we use it in services, technologies, and vendors. Also something that you could do in your own framework. What are my company security services I deliver to my company? Which technologies I have services, and so on. So that's the idea. Again, the idea is that we have this connection together, this traceability from business-oriented, or from business in the top to down to the control measures. They give us completeness, justification, and eventually you can say that actually you have a way to talk to business stakeholders. You have break that link there. You can justify that you are taking this decision, like all the regulations that are outside, you have to take this decision. No one says how you do it. That's an example of how you can defend that approach. And again, how you defend that you are making appropriate decisions. That is the appropriate security controls. By trusting these things together, I think you have a good argument. We think that you have a good framework to support, to demonstrate that value that you are putting in security. Thank you for navigating with me the framework and in these minutes. I think we can maybe open for questions now.
Yes, thank you, Alonso and Mark. So the first question is, are there any quick wins organizations can expect from adopting this framework?
Well, I'll take that if you like, Angel. Yes, there are. You can establish a common platform which everyone understands and which allows you to collaborate across the enterprise. Everyone knows what they're talking about because they can see all the connections between them. It connects people across all the different organizational units to work towards the same goals. And it's also possible with BizDesign to establish simple dashboards that can present the information in a way that's easily understandable without having to go into the complexities of the framework and give people the information they need to come to conclusions and to discuss the problems they're facing. That's a starting point.
Thank you. We have a second question. Can you please repeat which software you recommend for organizing and documenting the security architecture? And is there multiple systems you have considered? Could you explain a little bit about what are their pros and cons?
Alonso?
I can take that one. We started in Excel and in database, as Mark mentioned before. We use a little bit of time to choose tools. So we try with Access or a database base made by us, and since we are not so database expert, it was not a very successful. We managed to get into a level, but when you had so many things, it was difficult. The tool that we found for us that matched best our requirements, it was the tool called BizDesign. That's one of the leaders, market leaders in enterprise security, in enterprise architecture. That was for us, for a specific use case, because we have not only the functionality use case, but also we have the security requirements. There is a lot of things that we require from our vendors. So for us, it was that the decision. But we evaluate the open source tools. We evaluate different tools in the my quadrant also. Let's say that you have to, instead of, I cannot recommend one. I mean, for us, it works well with design, but I think you should see your requirements first. But at least try to go to a professional tool like these ones. All the call it the technology stack there, or the market is called enterprise architecture tools, software tools. So there is a lot to choose between, different price ranges, different functionalities, cloud-based, on-prem based, many things to choose from there. But the enterprise architecture tools.
Okay, thank you. We have a new question. How to prove value with this model and secure funding to this kind of initiative?
I think that's probably the most interesting aspect in a way. It's what we were trying to achieve from the start. I've been looking for a way to demonstrate value for years. And the way that this model helps to do that is that business people are only thinking business terms. So they're thinking about what's important for us, what are the processes we're performing that give us the greatest value. And if they are saying to us, look, we need our customers to trust that we're looking after their information, that's a business driver for security. So we can take that, draw it down to attributes of confidentiality and anonymity and so on, all the way down to the components that we implement, identity management systems, Active Directory, all these elements, GDPR compliance, and demonstrate to the business, this is what we're doing because you told us that confidentiality of information was really important to your customers. That's how you demonstrate the value. And if you can show that you are doing it properly, then it's not difficult to get the funding you need to implement the necessary controls. Hope that answers the question.
Good tip there. I think that was the end of the questions. If you have any further questions, you see the email address at the bottom of the slide, so you can email the team if you have any further questions. And I think that's it. So thank you very much for participating and hope to see you next time.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.